My name is Claire, and I'm 28 years old. For 5 years, I kept my family from losing everything while my older brother got all the praise. They called me their helper and planned to give him the entire inheritance, until I stood up at the will reading and slid a folder across the table. The look on my father's face when he opened it? Priceless. Before I tell you what was inside, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about family secrets that change everything. I stood in my apartment at 2 in the morning, surrounded by folders I should have thrown away years ago. Bank statements, payment confirmations, receipts for bills that weren't mine. Every single document told the same story. I was the family's emergency fund, their crisis manager, their silent cleanup crew. And tomorrow, I'd find out exactly how much that was worth to them. But let me back up. Let me tell you how I got here, holding a stack of papers that would change everything, in a room that smelled like instant coffee and exhaustion. My name is Claire, and I'm 28 years old. I work 2 jobs, one as an administrative assistant at a medical office, the other doing freelance bookkeeping on weekends. My apartment is small, my furniture is secondhand, and my savings account has exactly $347 in it. Want to know why? Because 5 years ago, my father nearly lost everything. His small construction business collapsed when 2 major clients defaulted on payments. The debt piled up fast: bank loans, credit cards, supplier bills, back taxes he'd ignored. My parents were weeks away from foreclosure when I stepped in. I was 23, fresh out of college with a degree in finance and exactly 0 experience negotiating with predatory lenders. But I learned. I spent months on the phone with banks, restructuring payment plans, selling off equipment, cutting costs everywhere I could. I took out a personal loan to cover their mortgage 1 month. I worked overtime and funneled every extra dollar into their sinking ship. I saved them. And then I kept saving them month after month, year after year, because the crisis never really ended. There was always something: a medical bill, a roof repair, the electrical system that needed rewiring. My parents never quite got back on their feet, and I never quite stopped catching them when they fell. The thing is, they never asked me to stop. They just expected me to keep going. Which brings me to my brother, Aaron. Aaron is 3 years older than me, and if you asked anyone in our family to describe him, they'd use words like charismatic and ambitious and full of potential. If you ask me, I'd say he's spent the last decade figuring out creative ways to avoid responsibility while still getting credit for showing up. When Dad's business collapsed, Aaron was in Thailand, finding himself. He came home 6 months later with a tan, 0 savings, and a story about teaching yoga on a beach. He stayed just long enough to borrow money from Dad, which I had just deposited, and then left again for another soul-searching adventure in South America. Last month, he came home for good. They welcomed him like a returning hero. Mom made his favorite dinner. Dad bought champagne. There were actual balloons in the living room, the kind with "Welcome Home" printed on them in shiny letters. And when the bill for that dinner came, Mom handed it to me with a smile and said, "Claire, honey, can you cover this? You're so good with money." I paid it. I always pay it. That night, I drove to my parents' house after my shift at the medical office, still wearing my work clothes, my body aching from sitting at a desk for 9 hours. I walked in to find Aaron sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, while Mom fussed over him with snacks. "Claire," Mom said brightly. "Perfect timing. The electricity bill came today, and it's a little high this month. They're threatening to cut it off if we don't pay by Friday. Can you take care of it?" Not would you. Not could you, if it's not too much trouble.
Can you?
Like it was already decided. Like I was the customer service department for their lives. "Sure," I said, because what else was I going to say? "I'll transfer it tonight." "You're such a lifesaver," Mom said, already turning back to Aaron. "Isn't she, Aaron?" Aaron glanced up from his phone long enough to grunt something that might have been agreement, then went back to scrolling. I stood there for a moment, invisible in my own family's living room, and felt something dark and bitter twist in my chest. Later that night, I was folding laundry in the kitchen because of course I was, when I heard Mom on the phone in the next room. "Oh, he's doing wonderful," she was saying, her voice warm with pride. "Aaron has such potential, you know. He's already talking about some business ideas. Big plans. A pause. Claire? Oh, she's fine. She helps with small tasks here and there. Bill payments, that sort of thing. Nothing major. Small tasks. 5 years of pulling them out of debt. 5 years of sacrificing my own stability to keep them afloat. 5 years of answering every panicked phone call, fixing every financial disaster, being the person they only remembered when something was broken. Small tasks. I finished folding the laundry in silence, my hands moving automatically while my mind spun in circles. I thought about all the times I'd worked overtime to cover their emergencies. The vacation I'd canceled because Dad needed money for equipment repairs. The car I still drove, even though it made horrible grinding noises because I couldn't afford a new one after paying for Mom's dental surgery. I thought about Aaron, who'd spent his 20s traveling the world while I spent mine keeping our family from falling apart. And I thought about the way Dad looked at him, with pride, with hope, with a kind of certainty that said, "This is the son who matters." That night, during dinner, Dad said something that made my stomach drop. We were sitting around the table, me, Mom, Dad, and Aaron, eating takeout I'd picked up on the way over. Aaron was talking about some vague plan to start a consulting business, throwing around buzzwords he'd clearly picked up from a podcast. Dad listened with rapt attention, nodding along like Aaron was delivering a TED Talk. "That's my boy," Dad said, clapping Aaron on the shoulder. "You've always had a head for business. One day, you'll take over everything." Everything. The word hung in the air like a blade. Aaron grinned. "I mean, someone's got to keep the family legacy going, right?" Mom laughed. "Of course. It only makes sense." I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, and nobody even looked at me. The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox from the family lawyer. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was brief, professional, and terrifying. It requested that I provide copies of all financial documents I'd been handling for my parents, loan agreements, payment records, account statements for estate planning purposes. Estate planning. My father wasn't even 60 yet. He was healthy, active, nowhere near thinking about mortality. This wasn't about death. This was about decisions. Decisions they were making without me. I drove to my parents' house that evening, the letter clutched in my hand. I found Mom in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I got a letter from the lawyer. He wants all the financial documents I've been managing. What's going on?" Mom didn't even look up from the cutting board. "Oh, that. Don't worry about it, sweetheart. Your father and I are just getting things organized. You know, for the future." "What kind of organizing?" "Estate planning. Making sure everything is properly documented." "And you didn't think to tell me?" She finally looked up, her expression somewhere between dismissive and annoyed. "Claire, don't overthink this. It's just paperwork. You're always so dramatic about these things." "Mom, I've been managing your finances for 5 years. I think I have a right to know." "Aaron is the eldest," she interrupted, her voice firm. "It's tradition. The oldest son inherits the family assets. That's how these things work." The words hit me like a slap. "So you're giving everything to Aaron?" "We're not giving anything to anyone yet. We're just planning ahead. Making sure things are clear when the time comes." "And where do I fit into this plan?" Mom sighed, like I was being deliberately difficult. "You'll always be part of this family, Claire. But Aaron is the one who'll carry on the family name, the business. It's natural." Natural. Like my 5 years of sacrifice were just what? Background noise? A side note in the story of Aaron's inevitable success? I left without another word, the letter crumpled in my fist. That night, I stood outside my parents' house in the dark, the summer air thick and humid around me. Through the window, I could see them inside, Mom and Dad and Aaron, laughing about something, looking like the perfect family unit. Complete without me. I whispered the words into the darkness, my voice barely audible. 5 years, and it still isn't enough. But even as I said it, something else was building inside me. Not just hurt. Not just anger. Determination. Because there was something my parents didn't know. Something I'd kept, documented, and protected for 5 years. And tomorrow, when I walked into that lawyer's office, I was going to find out exactly what it was worth. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and expensive furniture polish. I sat in the waiting room, my bag heavy with the documents Mr. Lambert had requested, and tried to ignore the way my heart was hammering against my ribs. I'd been here once before, 5 years ago, during the worst of Dad's financial crisis. Back then, I'd signed papers I barely understood, desperate to do whatever it took to save my parents' house. Now I was back, and I had a feeling those papers were about to matter in ways I hadn't anticipated. "Ms. Harrison?" The receptionist smiled at me. "Mr. Lambert will see you now." I followed her down a hallway lined with certificates and awards, into an office that managed to be both spacious and claustrophobic at the same time. Mr. Lambert sat behind a massive desk, and the moment I saw his face, I knew something was wrong. He looked uncomfortable. Actually, uncomfortable wasn't the right word. He looked like a man who was about to deliver bad news and wasn't happy about it. "Claire," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm but brief. "Thank you for coming in. Please sit." I sat, placing my bag carefully on the floor beside me. "You said you needed financial documents?" "Yes, He paused, adjusting his glasses. "Actually, before we get to that, there's something I need to discuss with you. Your father updated his will last week." My stomach dropped. "Updated how?" Mr. Lambert pulled out a folder, thin, official-looking, and opened it carefully. "Your father has named Aaron as the sole heir to the family home, the business assets, and the property on Riverside."
Soleil.
The words echoed in my head, bouncing around like they were trying to find a place to land. "And me?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Mr. Lambert's expression tightened with something that looked like pity. "You're listed as, let me read it exactly, supporting financial caretaker." I laughed. I actually laughed, this sharp, bitter sound that didn't belong to me. "Supporting financial caretaker," I repeated. "That's what I am. That's my role."
I'm sorry, Claire.
I advised your father to reconsider the structure, but he insisted it was tradition. He said. Lambert hesitated. "He said you didn't need anything, that you were capable of building your own life." The rage came then, hot and immediate, but I pushed it down. I couldn't afford to fall apart, not here, not now. "Can I see the documents?" I asked. Lambert slid them across the desk. I picked them up with steady hands and started reading. The will was exactly as he described. Everything to Aaron, nothing to me except the vague designation of financial caretaker, which apparently meant I'd have the honor of continuing to manage their money while my brother inherited the results of my labor. But it was the next set of documents that made my blood run cold. Financial agreements, loan restructuring papers, bank negotiations, all with Aaron's signature. Aaron, who hadn't been in the country when most of these were signed. Aaron, who'd never spoken to a bank officer in his life. Aaron, who didn't know the difference between an APR and an APB. "Mr. Lambert," I said slowly, "these signatures." Aaron's signatures. When were these documents signed? Lambert leaned forward, scanning the dates. His face paled slightly. These would have been 3 years ago, during the second restructuring phase. Aaron was in Argentina 3 years ago. Silence. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying someone forged a signature," I said flatly. "I'm saying these documents are fraudulent." Lambert's professional composure cracked. "If that's true, then these agreements could be challenged. The entire structure of the debt resolution could be compromised," I finished. "Which means everything that was built on top of it, including this will, is built on a lie." I gathered the documents and placed them carefully back in the folder. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The shock had burned away, leaving something harder, colder. "I need copies of everything," I said. "Every document with Aaron's signature. Every agreement from the past 5 years." Lambert studied me for a long moment. "Claire, if you're planning what I think you're planning, I'm not planning anything except protecting myself. You just told me I'm not even inheriting the debts I paid off. So, I think I'm entitled to a little due diligence." He nodded slowly and started making copies. As the printer hummed, he said quietly, "For what it's worth, I told your father this was a mistake. You're the one who saved them. You deserve to be recognized for that." "Deserve?" I said, the word tasting bitter. I'm starting to realize that what we deserve and what we get are two very different things. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers. Every receipt, every bank statement, every email confirmation. 5 years of my life, documented in black and white. I'd kept everything. Every single thing. At the time, I told myself it was just good financial practice, keeping records in case we were audited or needed to prove payments. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I think I'd known. I'd known that one day, I might need proof that I'd existed, that my sacrifices had been real, that I hadn't just imagined the weight of carrying my family on my back. I organized everything chronologically, creating a timeline of crisis and resolution. Here was the first bank negotiation. Here was the payment that stopped foreclosure. Here was the month I'd covered 3 different emergencies with money I'd borrowed from my own credit card. And here was the transfer agreement from 5 years ago. I pulled it out slowly, reading it for the first time in years. It was the document I'd signed giving me temporary power of attorney during Dad's bankruptcy crisis. I needed it to negotiate with banks on his behalf, to make financial decisions when he was too overwhelmed to function. I remembered signing it. I remembered the lawyer, a different lawyer, not Lambert, explaining that it was temporary, just to get through the crisis. But as I read through it now, actually read it instead of skimming in panic, I saw something I'd missed before. A clause. Buried in the legal language, easy to miss. If the designated agent successfully resolves more than 50% of the listed financial liabilities within the designated time period, said agent shall retain partial ownership rights to the secured assets, including but not limited to real property and business interests, as protection against future liability claims. I read it again, and again. Then I pulled out my calculator and started adding up numbers. The original debt, $847,000. The amount I'd personally resolved, paid, or negotiated away, $823,000. That was 97%. I'd resolved 97% of their debt, which meant, according to this clause, I had partial ownership rights. Legal rights. Not moral rights, not family obligation rights. Actual, enforceable legal rights. I grabbed my phone and called Mr. Lambert. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding sleepy. "Lambert," he said. "It's Claire Harrison. I need to ask you something about the power of attorney agreement from 5 years ago. The one I signed during the bankruptcy crisis." I heard rustling, like he was sitting up. "What about it?" "There's a clause about partial ownership if I resolved more than half the debt. Does that clause still stand?" A long pause. Then, "Let me look at my files. I'll call you back." 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Claire," Lambert said, his voice careful, "that clause is still legally binding. The agreement was never formally dissolved. If you can prove you resolved the majority of the listed liabilities, then yes, you have partial ownership rights." Even though my father updated his will last week, the ownership clause predates the will. He can't give away something he doesn't fully own. I closed my eyes, feeling something like hope and terror mixing in my chest. Did my father know this clause still stands? Lambert's silence was answer enough. "He assumed you wouldn't keep records," he said finally. "He assumed you'd just let it go." I laughed again, that same sharp sound from earlier. "He doesn't know me at all, does he?" "Apparently not." I thanked him and hung up, then sat staring at the documents spread across my table. 5 years of invisible labor, suddenly visible. 5 years of being taken for granted, suddenly documented. 5 years of being told I didn't matter, suddenly proven wrong. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I organized my folder until it was perfect, every document in order, every timeline clear, every piece of evidence irrefutable. I cross-referenced dates, highlighted key passages, and created a summary sheet that laid out exactly what I'd done and exactly what it meant legally. Meanwhile, Life at my parents' house continued, as if nothing had changed. Aaron started making plans for his property. He invited friends over to see the house, talking about renovations he wanted to make, rooms he wanted to convert. He spoke with the confidence of someone who'd already inherited, whose future was secure. One evening, I stopped by to drop off some groceries Mom had asked me to pick up because of course she had. I found Aaron in the living room with 3 of his friends, pointing at walls and talking about knocking them down to create an open concept. "This whole space will be perfect for entertaining," he said. "Once it's mine, I'm going to really make this place something special. Once it's mine." He saw me in the doorway and grinned.
Hey, sis.
"What do you think? Should I keep the fireplace or modernize it?" I looked at him, at his easy confidence, at the way he'd already moved into a future that didn't include my past. "I think you should wait until it's actually yours," I said quietly. He laughed. "Come on, don't be weird about this. You know how this works. Dad knows who can handle responsibility." The irony almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I smiled, a small, careful smile, and said, "You're right. Dad knows exactly who handles responsibility." Aaron turned back to his friends, already dismissing me, and I left the groceries on the kitchen counter and walked out. The next day, Mom called. "Claire, honey, we're having a little gathering on Friday. A will reading party. Just something small to celebrate Aaron's future. Can you help me decorate?" A celebration. They were throwing a party for my erasure. "Sure, Mom," I said. "I'll be there." "Wonderful. And wear something nice, okay? We're taking photos." I hung up and looked at the folder on my table, thick, organized, ready. "I'll wear something nice," I said to my empty apartment. "Don't worry." That night, I had a moment of doubt. I sat on my floor, surrounded by papers, and let myself remember being a kid. I remembered helping Dad with his business spreadsheets when I was 12, proud that he trusted me with grown-up work. I remembered Aaron getting praised for bringing home a decent report card while I got a pat on the head for managing the family budget. I remembered learning, slowly and painfully, that being helpful meant being invisible. That solving problems quietly meant nobody noticed you existed. That pattern had followed me my entire life. At school, I was the girl who helped everyone with homework but never got invited to parties. At work, I was the employee who fixed everyone's mistakes but never got promoted. In my family, I was the emergency fund, the cleanup crew, the one who kept things running while everyone else got credit for the results. I'd made myself so useful that I'd become disposable. But not anymore. I picked up the folder, feeling its weight in my hands, and made a promise to myself. This time, I won't stay invisible. Friday came. I dressed carefully, not too fancy, not too casual. Professional.
Composed.
I did my hair and makeup, not to look pretty, but to look certain. I needed to look like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I put the folder in my bag and drove to the lawyer's office, my hands steady on the wheel. This was it. No more being quiet. No more being convenient. No more making myself small, so everyone else could feel big. Today, I was going to take up space. The morning of the will reading, I woke up at 5 and couldn't fall back asleep. I lay in bed watching the ceiling slowly brighten with dawn light, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. What if the clause wasn't as strong as Lambert said? What if Dad had a lawyer who could argue it away? What if I walked in there, revealed my hand, and they just laughed at me? What if I'd spent 5 years saving them, only to prove I was exactly as powerless as they always thought? I got up and made coffee, then sat at my kitchen table one more time with my folder. I'd been over it 100 times in the past week, but I needed to be sure. I needed to be certain that every document was in order, every date was correct, every piece of evidence was ironclad. The folder had 3 sections. Section 1. The crisis. This contained every document from 5 years ago: the foreclosure notice, the bankruptcy filing, the original debt amount, the power of attorney agreement with the ownership clause clearly highlighted. Section 2. The resolution. This was the heart of it. Every payment I'd made, every loan I'd negotiated, every creditor I'd settled with. Each document was dated and cross-referenced with my bank statements. I'd even included emails and text messages showing my parents asking me to handle things and me confirming I'd done so. Section 3. The proof. This was the math. A detailed spreadsheet showing the original debt versus what I'd resolved. 97%. With sources for every number, every calculation checked and rechecked. It was bulletproof. I knew it was bulletproof. But my hand still shook as I closed the folder and put it in my bag. I arrived at the lawyer's office at 11, 30 minutes before the reading was scheduled to start. The receptionist greeted me with professional warmth and directed me to the same conference room where Lambert had first told me about the will. The room was set up like a celebration. Someone had brought flowers. There was a tray of pastries on the side table and a bottle of champagne on ice, because apparently we were commemorating my erasure with sparkling wine. Mom and Dad arrived next, both dressed up, both smiling. Dad wore a suit I'd paid to have dry cleaned last month. Mom wore a necklace I'd bought her for her birthday 2 years ago.
They saw me and waved.
"Claire, you made it," Mom said, as if there had been any question. "Doesn't everything look lovely?" Aaron picked out the flowers.
Of course he did.
Aaron arrived last, 15 minutes late, wearing a blazer that made him look like he was attending his own coronation. His friends weren't with him. This was family only, plus Lambert, but he had that same easy confidence, that certainty that the world would arrange itself in his favor. He clapped Dad on the shoulder. "Ready for this, old man?" Dad laughed. "This is just a formality, son. Just making it official." Aaron's eyes found mine across the room, and he smirked. Not cruelly, exactly. Just smugly. Like he'd won a competition I hadn't known we were having. I sat down in my chair, placed my bag beside me, and folded my hands in my lap. Lambert entered looking professional and impassive. If he was surprised to see the celebratory setup, he didn't show it. He took his seat at the head of the table and opened his briefcase. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Let's begin." The reading started exactly as I'd expected. Lambert went through the legal preliminaries, explaining that this was the last will and testament of Robert James Harrison, that it had been updated the previous week, that it superseded all previous versions. Then he started reading the actual contents. "To my son, Aaron Michael Harrison, I leave the family home at 442 Riverside Drive, along with all furnishings and contents therein. I further leave him the business assets of Harrison Construction, including all equipment, contracts, and client relationships. I additionally leave him the undeveloped property at Riverside Junction, with the understanding that he will use these assets to build a future for himself and continue the family legacy." Aaron leaned back in his chair, trying to look humble but failing completely. Dad reached over and squeezed his shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. Lambert continued. "To my daughter, Claire Elizabeth Harrison, I leave my gratitude for her support over the years. She will continue in her role as financial advisor to the family, should she choose to accept this responsibility. Gratitude. Not property. Not security. Not recognition. Gratitude." Mom leaned toward me and whispered, "See? Your father appreciates you." I said nothing. Lambert finished reading and set down the document. There was a moment of silence, and then Dad pushed the property deed across the table toward Aaron with a ceremonial flourish. "There you go, son," he said. "It's official now. Everything we've built, it's yours." Aaron picked up the deed, grinning. He looked at me, and I saw it in his eyes. Not malice, exactly, but satisfaction. The satisfaction of someone who'd always known he was the favorite and had just had it confirmed in writing. "No hard feelings, sis," he said. "You know how it is. Family tradition and all." I stood up. The movement was so sudden that everyone stopped and looked at me. I reached into my bag, pulled out my folder, thick, organized, heavy with documentation, and slid it across the table. It landed in front of Dad with a soft thump. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "there's something you all need to see." Mom frowned. "Claire, this isn't the time for your paperwork nonsense." "I think it is," I said. Dad looked at the folder like it was a snake that might bite him. For a moment he didn't move. Then, slowly, he opened it. I watched his face as he read the first page. The summary sheet I'd created, laying out everything in clear, simple terms. His expression changed slowly, from casual interest to confusion to recognition to something that looked a lot like fear. He flipped to the next page. And the next. His hands moved faster, rifling through documents, his face getting paler with each one. Aaron leaned over, trying to see what had Dad so rattled. "What is this?" Dad didn't answer. He kept reading, his jaw getting tighter, his breathing getting harder. Mom reached for the folder. "Robert, what's wrong?" Dad slammed the folder shut, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father look at me with something other than casual dismissal. He looked at me with fury. "What did you do?" His voice echoed off the walls. Aaron jerked back in his chair. Mom's hand flew to her chest. I stood there, hands steady at my sides, and felt 5 years of being invisible finally crystallize into something visible, undeniable, and completely beyond their control. "I saved you," I said quietly. "That's what I did." The silence after Dad's shout was deafening. It hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking, while everyone tried to process what had just happened. Aaron recovered first. He grabbed the folder from Dad's hands, yanking it across the table with enough force that some papers spilled out. He started flipping through pages, his eyes scanning without comprehension, his face twisting with confusion. "What is this?" he demanded. "These are just bank statements and receipts." "So what?" Lambert cleared his throat. The sound made everyone look at him, and I saw recognition dawning on his face. Not surprise, exactly, but the realization that the moment we'd implicitly prepared for had finally arrived. "Mr. Harrison," Lambert said carefully, "perhaps you should allow me to explain what Ms. Harrison has presented." "I know what she's presented," Dad said, his voice shaking. 5 years of guilt trips documented in a binder. "Actually," I said, still standing, still steady, "it's 5 years of financial intervention, documented with dates, amounts, and legal implications." Mom stood up too, her face flushed with anger. "Claire, how dare you disrupt this day with your—" "Let Lambert speak," I interrupted. My voice was quiet, but something in it made Mom's mouth snap shut. Lambert pulled the folder toward himself and extracted the summary sheet. "What Claire has provided is comprehensive documentation of her role in resolving your family's financial crisis 5 years ago. According to these records, she personally handled approximately 97% of the debt resolution." "So she paid some bills," Aaron said dismissively. "We all sacrifice for family." "It's more than that," Lambert continued, and now his voice had taken on that careful lawyer tone, the one that means you're about to hear something important. 5 years ago, during the bankruptcy crisis, Claire was granted temporary power of attorney to negotiate on your father's behalf. Dad's face had gone from red to gray. "I know that. It was temporary. The crisis is over." "The power of attorney agreement contained a protective clause," Lambert said. "I'm going to read it exactly as written. If the designated agent successfully resolves more than 50% of the listed financial liabilities within the designated time period, said agent shall retain partial ownership rights to the secured assets, including but not limited to real property and business interests." The room went completely still. "That's—" Mom's voice trailed off. "That can't be right." Lambert looked at her with professional sympathy. "It's a standard protection clause in these types of agreements. It ensures that if someone takes on substantial financial liability on your behalf, they can't later be held responsible for debts they resolved without having any legal claim to the secured assets." Aaron's face had gone pale.
"Wait.
"Are you saying Claire owns part of the house? Part of the business?" "According to this clause, yes. She has partial ownership rights based on her documented resolution of the family debt." "How much is partial?" Dad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lambert pulled out my spreadsheet, the one that showed all the math in neat, irrefutable columns. Based on these calculations, Claire resolved approximately 97% of the original debt. The exact percentage of ownership would need to be determined by a detailed legal analysis, but it's safe to say it's substantial. Mom turned on me, her eyes blazing. "You trapped us. You trapped your own father with fine print." Something in me snapped. No, I said, and my voice was louder now, harder. I saved you. I saved you when the bank was about to take everything. I saved you when you couldn't make payroll. I saved you when the creditors were threatening legal action. And every single time I did, you asked me to sign papers, handle negotiations, fix whatever was broken. You didn't care about fine print then. You just wanted the problem to go away. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo gallery. I'd taken screenshots of old text messages, just in case. Here, I said, holding up the phone so everyone could see. Mom, September 2019. Claire, please just sign whatever the bank needs. We're desperate. Dad, December 2019. Can you take care of the creditor paperwork? I can't deal with it right now. Mom again, April 2020. You're so good at this stuff. Just handle whatever needs handling. I lowered the phone. You told me to handle it. So I did. And when I signed papers that protected me from drowning along with you, that wasn't a trap. That was basic legal sense. Some extended family members had started arriving. Aunts, uncles, cousins invited to witness Aaron's big moment. They clustered in the doorway now, confused by the tension, trying to understand what was happening. One of my aunts, Linda, stepped forward hesitantly. What's going on? I thought this was a will reading. It is, Aaron said bitterly. Apparently, we're just finding out that half of what Dad's giving me isn't actually his to give. Aunt Linda's eyes went wide. What? Another family member, Uncle Tom, pushed into the room. Wait, I'm confused. Claire did what now? Claire saved Mom and Dad from bankruptcy 5 years ago, I said, my voice carrying across the room. While Aaron was in Thailand finding himself, I was here negotiating with banks and paying off creditors. Apparently nobody thought that was worth mentioning. I saw recognition dawn on several faces. My cousin Sarah actually gasped. Wait, Sarah said. I remember now. There was that whole crisis with the business. But I thought, Aaron, didn't you say you helped fix that? Aaron's face went red. I did what I could. You were in Argentina, I said flatly. You sent an email asking if everything was okay. That was your contribution. The room erupted in murmurs. Family members who'd been told one story were suddenly realizing they'd been lied to, or at least fed a very selective version of the truth. Dad tried to regain control. This is a family matter. We don't need. Actually, Lambert interrupted gently. This is now a legal matter. Ms. Harrison has presented evidence of a valid ownership claim. Until this is resolved, I cannot proceed with transferring these assets. Aaron slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. You can't just show up with a folder and steal my inheritance. I'm not stealing anything, I said. I'm claiming what's legally mine. Based on some technicality you hid from everyone. Based on a clause that was in a document your parents asked me to sign during a crisis you weren't even here for. Aaron, Dad said, his voice shaking, calm down. We can fix this.
How?
Aaron demanded. How exactly do you fix this? Dad turned to Lambert. There has to be a way around this. The will is valid, right? I updated it last week. That's got to count for something. The will is valid, Lambert confirmed. But you cannot will away property you don't fully own. If Claire has a legitimate ownership claim that predates your will, then that claim takes precedence. Dad's face crumpled. For the first time since this started, he looked not angry but defeated. He looked like a man who'd made a terrible miscalculation and was only now seeing the consequences. Claire, he said quietly, what do you want? The question hung in the air. Everyone was looking at me now. The entire room, family, lawyer, parents, brother, all waiting to see what the invisible daughter would do now that she was suddenly, inescapably visible. I looked at Dad, at his gray face and trembling hands, and felt something complicated twist in my chest. This was the man who'd praised Aaron for bringing home a decent report card while I managed the family budget. This was the man who'd said one day Aaron will take over everything while I paid his bills. This was the man who'd updated his will last week to erase me from the family's future. But he was also the man who'd taught me to read spreadsheets when I was 12 because he thought I was smart enough to understand them. The man who'd called me his little problem solver with genuine affection. The man who'd failed me over and over again, not out of cruelty, but out of blind spots so deep he couldn't even see I was standing in them. I said slowly, for you to tell me the truth. Did you know about this clause when you updated your will last week? Dad's silence was answer enough. Lambert shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Harrison came to me last week asking about the power of attorney agreement. I told him it contained protective clauses. He asked if Claire would have any legal claim to the property. I told him she would, if she could prove substantial debt resolution. And what did my father say? I asked, though I already knew. Lambert met my eyes. He said, and I quote, "Claire won't have proof. She does these things and moves on. She doesn't keep records." The words landed like stones. Aaron looked at Dad. You knew? You knew she might have a claim, and you just assumed she wouldn't be able to prove it. Dad didn't answer. He was staring at the folder on the table like it was a bomb that had already detonated. Mom found her voice. You have to understand, Claire. We didn't realize you were keeping track of everything. It seemed like you were just helping out, like family does. For 5 years, I said. You thought I was just helping out for 5 years? Covering hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt? And it never occurred to you that I might be keeping records for tax purposes, if nothing else? Mom had no answer. I turned back to Lambert. What happens now? Now, he said, we need to determine the exact scope of your ownership claim. I'll need to review all of this documentation carefully and provide a legal assessment. In the meantime, Mr. Harrison cannot transfer the property or business assets without your written consent. Aaron made a strangled sound. So, what? She just gets to hold everything hostage? She gets to protect her legal interests, Lambert corrected, just as you're entitled to protect yours. I picked up my bag, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the last hour was draining away, leaving me shaky and hollow. I'm going home, I said. Lambert, please send me your assessment when it's ready. I'll review whatever legal options I have. Claire, wait, Dad said, finally finding words. His voice was rough, desperate.
We need to talk about this.
As a family. I looked at him, this man who'd just tried to erase me from his will while assuming I was too disorganized to fight back, and felt something break inside me. We're not a family, I said quietly. We're people who share DNA and a history of emergencies I fix. There's a difference. I walked out of the conference room, past the shocked faces of relatives, past the celebration setup that now looked absurd, past the receptionist who carefully didn't make eye contact. I made it to my car before the shaking started. I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, and felt 5 years of buried emotion trying to claw its way out. Anger and grief and relief and terror all mixing together until I couldn't tell them apart. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I'd stood up. I'd spoken up. I'd refused to be erased. And I had absolutely no idea what came next. My phone buzzed. A text from Aaron. We need to talk. You're tearing this family apart. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. I didn't tear anything apart. I just finally stopped holding it together. I put the phone away and started the car. Whatever happened next, whatever legal battles or family drama was about to unfold, one thing was certain. I was done being invisible. And I was done apologizing for taking up space. The next 3 days were chaos. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Aaron called 17 times. Mom left voicemails that started pleading and ended accusing. Dad sent text messages that were somehow both apologetic and demanding at the same time. I ignored most of them. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out who I was when I wasn't fixing everyone else's problems. But on the 4th day, Lambert called with an update. I've completed my analysis, he said. Your ownership claim is solid. Based on the debt you resolved and the protective clause in the power of attorney agreement, you have legitimate legal standing to claim approximately 48% ownership of the secured assets. 48%. Almost half of everything. What does that mean practically?
I asked.
It means your father cannot transfer, sell, or significantly modify the property or business assets without your written consent. It also means you're entitled to be consulted on all major decisions regarding those assets going forward. I sat down, my legs suddenly unsteady. So the will as written cannot be executed as written, Lambert confirmed. Not without your agreement. After I hung up, I stared at my apartment wall for a long time, processing what this meant. I had power now. Real power. The kind that couldn't be dismissed or ignored or taken for granted. The question was, what did I want to do with it? That evening, Lambert organized an emergency family meeting. Everyone was required to attend, me, Mom, Dad, Aaron, and Lambert himself to mediate. The atmosphere in that conference room was completely different from the will reading.
No flowers. No champagne. No celebration.
Just 5 people sitting around a table, the weight of unspoken accusations heavy in the air. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 4 days. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed. Aaron sat with his arms crossed, radiating resentment. Lambert cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss the situation regarding the Harrison estate and find a path forward that respects everyone's legal rights. Legal rights, Mom said bitterly. Is that what we're calling this now? Mrs. Harrison, Lambert said gently, Claire has a valid ownership claim. We need to address that reality. Aaron leaned forward.
Fine.
Let's address it. Claire, what's your price? What do we have to pay you to sign away your claim and let Dad's will stand as written? The bluntness of it actually made me laugh. You think this is about money? Isn't it? Aaron shot back. You're holding our inheritance hostage. What else would it be about? Respect, I said quietly. Recognition. Acknowledgement that I exist and that my 5 years of sacrifice meant something. Mom made a dismissive sound. We appreciate what you did, Claire. But you can't expect. I don't expect anything anymore, I interrupted. That's the problem. I spent 5 years expecting you to notice, expecting you to care, expecting you to see me as something other than a convenient solution to your problems. I'm done expecting. Dad finally spoke, his voice rough. So, what do you want, Claire? Just tell us. What will make this right? I pulled out a document I'd prepared, my own proposal, carefully written with Lambert's guidance. I want a house title split legally between me and Aaron. Equal ownership. I want the business assets put in a trust where we both have equal voting rights. And I want written acknowledgement of my role in resolving your debts, included as an addendum to the will. The room went silent. You want half of everything, Aaron said flatly. I want recognition for saving everything, I corrected. There's a difference. Mom's voice rose. You're tearing this family apart over signatures and ego. Something in me snapped. The careful composure I'd been maintaining for days cracked, and the anger underneath came flooding out. No, Mom, I said, my voice shaking. You tore this family apart when you decided one child mattered more than the other. When you praised Aaron for showing up while I did the actual work. When you celebrated his potential while taking my reality for granted. You did that. Not me. We raised you both the same, Mom protested weakly. You didn't, I said. You raised Aaron to believe the world owed him success. You raised me to believe my job was to make sure he got it. Aaron stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're not business material, Claire. You're good with numbers and spreadsheets, sure, but running an actual business? Dad knows I'm better suited. Where were you when the bank wanted to close it? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Where were you when suppliers were threatening to sue? Where were you when Dad was having panic attacks because he couldn't make payroll? Aaron opened his mouth, then closed it. I was there, I continued. I was the one who negotiated the payment extension that kept your future empire alive. I was the one who convinced creditors to settle for less. I was the one who worked 80-hour weeks to earn enough to cover what the business couldn't. So don't tell me I'm not business material. I saved a business you weren't even here to watch die. Dad put his head in his hands. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Dad said something that surprised me. His voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone heard it. She's right. Mom turned to him. Robert. She's right, Dad repeated louder now. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time since the will reading. I was ashamed. When everything fell apart, when I had to ask my 23-year-old daughter to save me because her older brother was off finding himself, I was ashamed. And instead of dealing with that shame, I built up Aaron, made him into what I needed him to be, the successor, the strong one, the one who could carry the family name. He laughed bitterly. But Aaron didn't carry anything. You did. And I couldn't admit that because admitting it meant admitting I'd failed. As a father, as a man, as a business owner. The confession hung in the air, raw and painful. So you gave him everything, I said softly, to make yourself feel better about leaning on me. Dad nodded, and I saw tears in his eyes. I thought if I gave Aaron the future, it would prove that I hadn't really failed, that I'd built something worth passing on. I didn't realize I was erasing you in the process. The admission changed something in the room. The defensive anger leaked out slowly, replaced by something more complicated, more honest. Lambert quietly suggested we take a break. Mom and Aaron stepped out, leaving me alone with Dad. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Dad said, "Tell me about the hospital bill." I looked at him, surprised. What? The hospital bill? Lambert mentioned it when he was reading through your documentation. I want to hear about it. From you. I took a deep breath. You had that health scare 3 years ago. You passed out at the work site, and they rushed you to the emergency room. When I got there, you were unconscious. The doctors were running tests, and the billing department needed insurance information. Dad nodded slowly. I remember waking up. You were sitting in the chair next to my bed. Your insurance had lapsed. I continued. You'd missed payments during the crisis, and the coverage had been terminated. The hospital wanted payment guarantees before they'd continue treatment. Mom and Aaron were both unreachable. Mom was visiting her sister. Aaron was... I don't even remember where Aaron was. What did you do? I gave them my credit card, I said simply. I told them to run whatever charges they needed. The bill came to $18,000. It took me 14 months to pay it off. Dad's face crumpled. Claire, you never asked how it got paid, I said. You just assumed the insurance had covered it. And I let you assume that because I didn't want you to feel guilty. I thought if I just handled it quietly, if I kept solving problems without making you face them, everything would be okay. But it wasn't okay, Dad said.
No.
It wasn't. Because you didn't see me. You saw a problem that got solved, but you didn't see me solving it. Dad was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When did you become so strong?" The question caught me off guard.
What?
You were always the reliable one, even as a kid. You'd handle things Aaron couldn't be bothered with. You'd stay up late helping me with paperwork. You made everything easier. He shook his head. I think that's why I leaned on you so hard during the crisis. Because I knew you could handle it. You were strong enough. Being strong doesn't mean I didn't need support, I said, my voice cracking. It doesn't mean I didn't need to know that my strength mattered to you. That I mattered to you. You do matter, Dad said desperately. Claire, you matter so much. Then why did you try to erase me from your will? The question stopped him cold. I wasn't trying to erase you, he said finally. I was trying to give Aaron what he needed without taking anything away from you. In my head, you were going to be fine no matter what. You're capable, independent, smart. Aaron needs more help. So, you decided I needed less because I'd already proven I could survive without you? Dad flinched. When you say it like that. That's what you did, I said. You punished me for being strong by assuming I didn't need anything. You rewarded Aaron for being weak by giving him everything. We sat in heavy silence. Through the conference room door, I could hear Mom and Aaron talking in low, tense voices. Finally, Dad spoke. What do we do now? How do we fix this? I don't know if we can fix it, I said honestly. But we can start being honest. We can start treating each other like we're actually family instead of roles we're playing. Mom and Aaron came back in, followed by Lambert. We all sat down again, the atmosphere slightly less hostile than before but still fragile. I spoke with Aaron, Mom said carefully. We discussed your proposal. And? I asked. Aaron looked uncomfortable, like the words were being pulled out of him against his will. I don't like it. I think the business should go to one person and I think I'm better suited to run it. But… He paused, struggling. I also can't pretend you didn't save it. I can't pretend I was here when you were doing the work. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. But it was acknowledgement, and that was more than I'd gotten in 5 years. The equal ownership is non-negotiable, I said. I'm not asking for permission. I have a legal claim, and I'm exercising it. Dad nodded slowly. Then we need to work out how to manage the assets together. How to make decisions without one person controlling everything. A trust structure makes sense, Lambert offered. Equal voting rights. Major decisions require both signatures and clearly defined boundaries for what constitutes a major decision. And if we disagree? Aaron asked. Then we negotiate like adults, I said. Or we hire a mediator. But neither of us gets to override the other just because they think they know better. Aaron didn't look happy, but he nodded. Over the next 2 weeks, we hammered out the details. Lambert drafted document after document, each one trying to balance my legal rights with my family's desire to maintain some version of Dad's original intent. It was exhausting. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Aaron would agree to something, then try to renegotiate it the next day. Mom would call crying about how I was destroying family unity. Dad would swing between supportive and resentful, depending on whether Aaron had gotten to him first. But slowly, painfully, we made progress. The new structure looked like this. The house would be split 50-50 between me and Aaron, with clear terms about how decisions regarding the property would be made. The business assets would go into a trust with equal voting rights. Any major financial decision, selling equipment, taking on new debt, significant renovations, required both our signatures. And critically, there would be a written acknowledgement of my role in saving the family from bankruptcy, included as an official addendum to the will. The day we all sat down to sign the revised documents, the atmosphere was tense but resigned. This wasn't what anyone had wanted, but it was what fairness demanded. Aaron signed with tight, angry movements. Mom cried quietly. Dad's hand shook as he put his signature on each page. I signed last, my signature firm and clear. It's done, Lambert said. The revised trust and property agreements are now legally binding. Nobody celebrated. As we gathered our things to leave, Aaron pulled me aside in the hallway. His expression was complicated, hurt, angry, but also something that might have been respect. You really blindsided me, he said. You've been handed everything without asking how it got there, I replied. For once, you had to see what it feels like when someone else holds the pen. I always thought. He trailed off, then started again. I always thought they favored me, because I earned it somehow. Because I was supposed to take over, so they invested in me. I didn't realize they were favoring me while you did all the actual work. It wasn't an apology. But it was closer than I'd expected. Maybe try earning your half this time, I said quietly. He nodded, something shifting in his expression. I'll try. After everyone else left, Dad asked to speak with me alone one more time. We stood in the parking lot, the afternoon sun warm on our faces. I have something for you, he said. He pulled out an old envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to me in handwriting I recognized as my grandmother's. What is this? Your grandmother left it for you before she died. She gave it to me and asked me to give it to you when the time was right. He looked ashamed. I kept it because I thought if you read it, you'd realize how much you were doing for us. And then maybe you'd stop. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in my grandmother's careful script. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope the world has been kind to you. I suspect it hasn't been kind enough, because you're too good at making everyone else's life easier. You were doing that even as a child, taking care of your parents, managing your brother, solving problems nobody asked you to solve. I want you to know that I see you.
I've always seen you.
You're the one who holds everyone together, and that's a gift, but it's also a burden. Please don't let that burden make you forget that you matter just as much as the people you're helping. I'm leaving you a small savings certificate. Not much, but it's yours alone. Nobody else's. Use it for something that makes you happy, not something that makes you useful. You are more than what you can do for others. With all my love, Grandma. I blinked back tears as I pulled out the savings certificate. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $15,000, but it was mine. Fully, completely mine. Why didn't you give this to me when she died? I asked. Because you were already doing too much, Dad said. And I was afraid if you had your own money, you'd stop helping us. I was selfish, Claire.
I'm sorry.
I held the envelope against my chest, feeling the weight of my grandmother's words, her recognition, her love. Thank you for giving it to me now, I said. Dad nodded, his eyes wet. I'm going to do better. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to try. 2 months later, I sat in my apartment, the same small apartment I'd been living in for years, and looked at the documents spread across my table. But this time, they weren't my parents' problems. They were my own plans. The legal battle was over. The new trust was established. Aaron and I had an awkward but functional working relationship. We'd made 2 joint decisions about the business so far, and while neither of us loved the process, we were learning to compromise. More importantly, I was learning to build my own life instead of maintaining everyone else's. I'd used my grandmother's savings to take a professional development course in financial planning. I was building a client base of my own, helping people manage their finances, but this time, I was getting paid for it. Properly paid, not just grateful acknowledgement. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Can we meet for coffee this week? I'd like your advice on something. Not a demand. Not an emergency. A request. I smiled and typed back. Sure. Wednesday at 2?
Perfect.
And Claire?
I'll pay.
It was a small thing, but it mattered. Another text came through, this one from Aaron. Found a potential client for the business. Need your input before I commit. Can you look at the contract? I sent back a thumbs up and made a note to review it that evening. Things weren't perfect. Mom still sometimes tried to guilt me into doing favors without reciprocation. Aaron still occasionally acted like he deserved more say in business decisions just because he was older. Dad still struggled with treating me as an equal partner instead of a convenient helper. But they were trying. And more importantly, I was no longer willing to accept less than I deserved just to keep the peace. A week later, Dad came to my apartment. It was the first time he'd visited. Usually I went to them, another small symbol of the old dynamic. But today, he'd asked if he could come to me. He brought coffee and pastries, another small gesture that acknowledged this was a meeting between equals, not a parent summoning a child. I need help with something, he said once we were settled. But this time, I want to do it right. I want to learn, not just have you fix it. What is it? I asked. Retirement planning. I've been avoiding it for years, but I'm not getting any younger. I don't want to end up in another financial crisis when I'm too old to recover from it. He pulled out a folder of his own, much thinner than mine had been, but it was a start. Bank statements, retirement account information, Social Security projections. I thought we could work on it together, he said. If you're willing. I'd like to learn. And this time I'd like to pay you for your time. Properly. I looked at him. This man who'd failed me so profoundly, who'd tried to erase me from his future, who'd only seen my value when I'd forced him to acknowledge it. But also this man who was sitting in my apartment, asking to learn, offering to pay, trying to be better. We can do it together, I said. But from now on, I'm not doing it alone. And I'm not doing it for free. Fair enough, Dad said, and he meant it. We spent the next 2 hours going through his finances. For the first time in my life, he asked questions instead of just waiting for me to solve things. He took notes. He engaged. He treated me like a professional whose knowledge had value. When he left, he hugged me, a real hug, not the perfunctory kind, and said, "Thank you for not giving up on us completely." I didn't give up on us, I said. I just stopped giving up on myself. After he left, I stood at my window, looking out at the city. My phone sat on the table behind me. The revised will documents saved in my cloud storage, proof that I existed, that I mattered, that my 5 years of sacrifice had been worth something after all. I wasn't invisible anymore. I'd spent so long making myself smaller, so everyone else could be bigger. I'd believed that being useful was the same as being valued, that solving problems quietly was the same as being appreciated. But I'd learned the hard way that you can't love people into seeing you. You can't sacrifice yourself into mattering. Sometimes you have to demand your space. You have to present your evidence. You have to slide the folder forward and stand up and refuse to disappear. And yes, it's terrifying. Yes, it risks everything. Yes, it might blow up your life. But being invisible is its own kind of death. I picked up my laptop and opened it to my financial planning business page. 3 new client inquiries waited for me. People who were willing to pay for my expertise, who valued my knowledge, who saw me as more than a convenient solution to their problems. I smiled and started typing responses. This was my life now. Not perfect, not without complications, but finally, completely, undeniably mine. And I was done apologizing for that. So here's my question for you. If you had proof that you saved everyone around you, but they still chose to erase you from their future, would you have the courage to demand they see you? If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice when everyone expects you to stay silent.